Okay, welcome everyone to the AIA Contract Documents webinar we call Understanding What's Available. So a few disclaimers before we get started here. Just a disclaimer that the information you get from the presentation today, which includes the Q&A section at the end, is not legal advice and should not be construed as legal advice. Also, this course is eligible for one AIA learning unit. If you reported your AIA member number when you registered for the webinar, you will receive credit for the course within 2 weeks. So with those out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I will introduce myself. My name is Sarah. I work with AIA Contract Documents with my colleague and co-presenter, Ben, who is on the line.
Hello.
So I work mainly doing training on AIA contract documents, basic principles, and mostly using our online service to edit and produce final documents, whereas Ben is our contract content czar. He responds to inquiries that come into our office regarding our contracts, and occasionally we team up to do trainings like today. So Ben is going to also be our questions guy at the end here. So anytime you have a question, type that into your GoToWebinar box where it says questions, and we'll get through as many of your questions as we can during the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation. If you're having any trouble seeing the visual here on the screen, I recommend just logging out of the webinar and logging back in. That should mitigate any visual problems. If you encounter any audio problems down the road, I recommend either logging out and logging back in or using your phone to do call-in audio. So I want to get started here today by just defining what we want to achieve in the next hour that we have you here. So the webinar is titled Understanding What's Available. That's a lot to cover. So we felt the best way to convey that information to you is review how we organize and classify our body of documents so that you can relate those classification concepts to your own projects and how you use AIA contract documents. We're also going to show you how to access available resources for more information beyond what we get the chance to cover today because we only have an hour. Ultimately, our goal is to help you choose which of our documents is best for your project and your needs in the moment that you go to choose a contract document. So I know we have a range in the audience here in terms of experience with AIA contract documents. Some of you may be completely unfamiliar. Some of you may be experienced and have been using them for a while now. But let's start from square one here. What is an AIA contract document? So AIA contract documents just refers to the body of approximately 200 or so forms and contracts that define those legal relationships that are involved in design and construction projects. So these contracts are created, they're drafted and revised by the AIA Contract Documents Committee. Now that committee is comprised of 35 members who are experts and have a wide range of backgrounds. They have backgrounds in design, construction, law, and insurance, anything relating to these AIA contract documents. And each document goes through a process of collecting and analyzing industry input. Then they're drafted and revised, possibly revised many, many times. And eventually, once they are ready to go, they are released for you to purchase and use for your own projects, either as is or with your edits to accommodate specific project requirements. So they're released as templates. Now, when you go to purchase one of these documents, you're going to have one of three options. So the first is you can purchase a basic single document. This just involves you picking out a template. You will enter your basic project details, the information of the parties who are related, any project details. And I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback here that we're having some visual problems here. I believe everyone should be able to see my screen by now. So you have your basic single document here. If you want to make any edits to your legal language, then you can have one of two options here. You can purchase a customizable single document or an unlimited 1-year access. Now, the only difference being with the customizable single document, of course, you can only produce one final document that you have customized, whereas with the unlimited 1-year access, you can customize and create as many final documents as you would like. Now, if you've purchased either a customizable single document or an unlimited 1-year access, you edit and finalize that document in the AIA Contract Documents online service. So once you purchase, you'll receive access via email to our online software, where you will choose a template for your project, and then you will create a draft using that template, make your edits, and finalize your draft in the online service. Now, to be clear, we won't be going over in this particular webinar principles on using the online service, but we do offer extensive training on completing documents in the online service. So what I'm going to do here is show you where exactly you can go to find that training if you are interested and will be using the online service. So I'm at the AIA Contract Documents homepage here. I'm going to hop over to the Learn tab, which is where we host our different trainings and resources. So if you want training on the online service, for example, I'm going to type in online service here. And you can see our upcoming live trainings. So we offer a weekly basics training on the online service. We also offer some other notable trainings, such as training for licensed administrators and completing payment applications and change orders in the online service. If you're looking for some on-demand written instructions on using the online service, you can click on the Help tab up here. That has a whole section on instructions on using the online service. A good place to start if you're here is the Beginner's Guide to Using the Online Service. That's going to cover all of the basic principles of using the online service all in one place here. And it's also going to include some quick videos to help you just perform anything you'd like to do in the online service. So that's where you can go if you have any questions regarding that. So now we're going to hop back to the presentation here. And once we have that out of the way, so now we're going to move into when you actually go to choose an AIA contract document. You may have purchased a single document. You may just be looking around. So when you go to the AIAcontracts.org, where we just were, and you click on the Documents tab, that's going to take you to something that looks kind of like this. So you're going to see that you have these 4 headers up here at the top: number, title, type, and family. Now, some of these fields may be self-explanatory. So such as the title, you can read that and pretty much assume what it means, and it's the title of the document. But some other fields here may not be quite as self-explanatory. So for example, what do these alphanumerics mean over here on the left? And what could a family possibly mean in this context? So after today, we want you to know exactly what all of this means so that next time you go to seek out a document, you're not blindly looking around. And for those of you who may have a little bit of an idea of what you see here and experience, we're going to dive a little deeper later on and explain some of those additional concepts so you have a better understanding of our documents as a body as a whole. So let's get started with the alphanumerics that you see over here on the left. We're going to go into a section that just explains what's with these numbers. So you may see these numbers all the time when you're working with AIA contract documents. A201, G703, alphanumerics like that. Most of the time, you may just ignore them and focus on the document title. And that's fine, but just a little context here. Each of these numbers actually represents an aspect of that document. So take a look here. Now, it's important to note that it's not important for you to memorize this breakdown here. We're going to go through each of these and what it means. Again, you don't need to memorize this, but the context here can be pretty helpful. So this provides a good overview of the different aspects that may go into a document. So breaking this down here, you have your series. So one way that we group our body of documents is by series, and each series is just distinguished by the use or purpose of that group of documents. And that's going to be represented by that first letter there. So all of your documents that start with an A are going to be your A series documents or your owner contractor agreements. B is going to be your owner architect. We have some other agreements, some miscellaneous documents there, exhibits, which we'll go through a little later. And G series documents are your contract administration forms, which we'll also be going through later. So throughout the presentation today, you're going to see all different kinds of alphanumerics here. We're going to cover documents from all different series. This next number here represents the different types of documents we have available. So we have a lot of different types of documents, as you see here. Now, with your 1, that's going to be your prime agreements, so just those key agreements that we're going to go over as well. If there's a 2 there, that's going to be conditions and scopes documents. We're going to be going over the A201, which you may be familiar with or you may have heard of, which defines those general conditions. Scope documents, so scopes define more specific services based on the nuances of the project. So those are additive as well, and they do not stand alone. They are paired with agreements. We also have bonds and qualification documents, which Ben will be going over later on. Sub-agreements, as opposed to the prime agreements that have that 1. We also have different guides, bid and construction documents, and architect's office documents. So you can see we have a wide range of documents that are available, and that's defined by that second numeric there. Your third is going to be the delivery method of your project. And you're going to see that these align pretty closely with our document families, which Ben and I are going to spend a good chunk of time on in just a little. So if you're not sure what these words mean here, we will be going through them when we go over our families. But just know that this refers to the delivery method of the entire project. So we'll see what a conventional delivery method looks like and what these other delivery methods look like as well as they form our contract document families. Moving on to this next alphanumeric here, that's just your sequence. That number is going to change if you have multiple documents of the same series type and delivery. This is just an organizational or filing number here, just to make sure we don't have any documents with the exact same alphanumeric. Again, keep things organized. And then at the end here, you're going to have the addition. As I mentioned earlier, our documents are often revised every 10 years or so. So when they are, we'll publish that document with the updated edition year. So that should give you some insight on where these alphanumerics actually come from when you see them on the contract documents homepages or just when you see contract documents in general. Always going to have that alphanumeric before the title that defines these aspects of the document. Now, in terms of the title, moving along in those headers there, Ben's going to be going over some key terms in just a little bit that you may see in the titles of our documents to help you understand and recognize those. I'm briefly going to touch on the different types of documents that you're going to see in that third column there. So we have 3 types of contract documents available for purchase. This is why we're called AIA Contract Documents and not just AIA Contracts. So your contracts are the majority of the documents we offer. So these are just the written agreements that identify the parties' roles and responsibilities. Simple as that, stripped down definition. We also offer different forms that aid contract administration and project management. So that's your change orders, your payment applications. Many of our forms start with a G. There are a few other forms that we offer as well that Ben will be going through. And then you're also going to have exhibits. These go at the end of contracts. So exhibits are not addendums. They are finalized ahead of time. And one note on our exhibits. So some exhibits, such as the Sustainable Project exhibit, are offered for purchase as separate documents. So you can purchase those documents on their own, although they still get added on to other agreements. Other exhibits, such as the insurance exhibit, for example, those are included in certain contract purchases, and you can decide whether or not to include them in your final contract. So exhibits can be offered in one of two ways. So now that we've gone over that, Ben is going to take you through some key terms that we've pulled out that, again, you might see in the document titles, and you're going to see them throughout the presentation. We're just going to define what exactly those mean and get everyone on the same page. So Ben, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I'm just going to briefly talk about these concepts that are on this slide. So first is a stipulated sum, and that's just like it sounds, a sum that is stipulated, sometimes called a fixed cost or fixed price. And so the contractor does the job for X dollars. Now this can change, of course, because anything can change, but you can have a stipulated sum of, let's say, $1 million. Then that is the stipulated sum. It's the amount that the parties agree to ahead of time. They enter into an agreement based on that stipulated sum. And then again, it can change. It can go up or down through the course of the project, but that is generally how it's set up. And again, we're mostly talking about owner-contractor agreements here. Owner-architect agreements are typically set up a little differently, and there are many different ways of compensating an architect, so that's a different story. But for owner-contractor agreements, just for example, A101 is an owner-contractor agreement that's for a stipulated sum. A102 is a cost-plus agreement, and that means that the basis of payment is the cost of the work plus a fee. So you have to determine what the cost of the work is, and then you also have a fee of some sort. So the parties agree to whatever that fee is for the percentage or a dollar amount. And so again, A102 is an example of that. And that has a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price. So that is the ceiling, so to speak. So the owner pays the contractor the cost of the work plus some sort of fee up to a ceiling, a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price of X dollars. Again, that can change, but the parties have that amount. If you don't know what the end price is going to be, or you cannot get a GMP, you can do cost plus without a GMP. So an example of that is A103. And so A102 and A103, those are both cost plus, so it's cost of work plus a fee. A102 is with a GMP, A103 is without a GMP. Again, GMP is a ceiling, the guaranteed maximum price. Also, we have some bond forms for sureties, and so we have a bid bond, we have a performance bond, a payment bond, and so these are a surety is a company, typically a bank, that would just that would guarantee the project is going to be completed. For example, if the contractor goes bankrupt, for example, then the surety, typically the bank, would step in and be able to finish the project. So we have some documents for that. Substantial completion is the point where the owner can actually occupy or utilize the work for its intended use. This is different from final completion, when everything is typically done. So the parties set a date of substantial completion, and then the parties agree once they've arrived at substantial completion, and then the owner can use the work, but there may be an inspection list, or what's sometimes called a punch list, of items that are still left to be corrected, typically minor items that the contractor is still obligated to perform or correct. And then once those are done, then you would achieve final completion. So we have forms for substantial completion as well.
All right, thank you, Ben. So you're going to see most of these terms show up a little later in the presentation. So just keep those definitions in mind as we go along. So now that we've gotten some context on where these documents come from, what they actually are, some key terms, and what's available, we're going to dive in here to our different contract families. And again, families is another method of grouping the different documents. So we're going to see the documents that are available within each family and how they relate to each other. Now, this is where we're going to start to get specific with the documents we have to offer. So as we're going through here, just keep your own projects in mind and try and find where they fit into these families if they do at all. And that's going to help you use this information to actually find which specific documents you'll want to use. And also remember that we'll be taking questions at the end, so please feel free to type those in as we go along. So we're going to start with our most common document family, and that's called the conventional family, also known as A201 or design, bid, build. It follows a design, bid, build delivery method. Now, the conventional family is just when the owner's project is divided into separate contracts. So one contract with the architect who covers design and a separate contract with the contractor who covers construction. So we're going to go through some visuals just to present what this actually means and the different relationships that can exist in the conventional family. So when you have your construction project, you're going to start with your owner. Your owner is going to start by retaining an architect. So that architect is going to not only prepare drawings and specifications according to the project, they're also going to assist the owner in obtaining bids and proposals for the project so that the owner can bid the project out and hire a contractor who is going to build the work. Now, the owner can retain the architect using one of our contract documents that is intended for this purpose. So we have a couple different documents here that define the relationship between the owner and the architect when the project is a design, bid, build, delivery method. Now, again, we're going to get specific into key documents here that form these basic legal relationships. We'll mostly be referring to the documents based on their alphanumeric. So I've also, in the handout section of your GoToMeeting box there, or whatever window you're using, I've attached our AIA Contract Documents desk reference, which just lists out all of the available contracts and forms. It may be helpful to have on hand as we're going through here, just to keep all of those different documents in mind. So you have your B101, the flagship owner-architect agreement, just a standard owner-architect agreement, again, in a conventional delivery method. Also, we have, if you're working with a more complex project, we have a more lengthy and detailed B103 that you can use, again, for more complex projects. And on the other hand, when you have a simpler project, we have an abbreviated owner-architect agreement. Now, you may see the three different agreements here. Not sure which one really applies to you, seeing as complex and abbreviated can be fairly subjective. So I'm going to show you exactly where you can go to take a look at these documents before purchasing them necessarily. So I'm going to return to the AIA Contract Documents home pages here. We were in the Learn tab. Now I'm going to hop over to the Documents tab, which we referenced earlier. Your best bet for getting to know a document is just to go to that Documents tab. Say, for example, you want to see what's actually in the B103. So I'm going to search for that document. And when I click on that, that's going to give me a synopsis of what's covered in the document. But also under the Resources section here, you're going to get a free sample preview. All of our documents are posted in their entirety in sample form online here. So you can really look through and get to know this document before you commit to using it. So you can see that there. Oops, apologies. Now, just keep that in mind, so you're welcome to take a look online of any of the documents that we covered today. So, returning here to the presentation, you have your different options for the owner-architect agreement. You're also going to have options for your owner-contractor agreement. So we have Ben referenced a few of these. Your flagship A101, and you're also with the stipulated sum, and you're also going to have options for that cost plus work that Ben mentioned earlier, with or without the GMP or guaranteed maximum price, just depending on your project. We also have an abbreviated version of the owner-contractor agreement. So you'll notice, taking a look at these documents here, that the architect and the contractor do not actually have a direct contractual relationship with each other. Now, that may seem a little odd given their inevitable collaboration during any project, but that collaboration is covered in the A201 document, which establishes the general conditions for a project. So the A201 is kind of like an umbrella over the whole project that coordinates the responsibilities of those involved. So this document is used in conjunction with the documents you see here. So that's going to be used along with any drawings, specifications, addenda, and/or modifications. All that together goes into that agreement. So you're defining those general conditions. They're used in conjunction with these agreements. The A201 does not stand alone. Now, in most construction contracts, you're going to, one more note here is that your B104 and your A104 now have asterisks next to them. That just is because they are abbreviated. There are abbreviated versions, and they define the general conditions within themselves. So they do not necessarily use the A201 because they define those general conditions within the actual body of themselves as contracts.
Sarah, if I could
Now,
jump in really quick.
Yeah, of course, go right ahead.
So the general conditions is actually in A104. So B104 would refer to the general conditions in A104, as opposed to, say, B101 and A101, both of which would apply and refer to A201 as a separate document. But the general conditions in B104 and A104 are in just A104.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
So in many construction projects, you're going to have more than just the architect, owner, and contractor making it happen. So you're going to see here several other common parties that may be involved in the project via contract. So for example, the contractor is likely going to be hiring subcontractors. So we have a document to define that relationship, that A401 contractor-subcontractor agreement. Now you're going to see this document show up in a few other families as well. This is a pretty common sub-agreement. So keep that in mind, the A401 used to define that. And the owner and the architect may also hire consultants. So for example, when the architect goes to hire a consultant, we have an agreement for that. That is your C401. And then the owner might also use that C103 owner consultants agreement to hire any direct consultants. So there you have the different parties and just a visual representation of that conventional design, bid, build family, and the key documents that are involved. Oops, I forgot one more, and that's the surety over here. Ben covered what a surety actually means. So if you have a surety company, we have different bonds available. That Ben will be getting into more detail a little later about that A310 and A312 there. But those define that relationship. So I believe that wraps up our conventional relationship diagram here. Ben, did I miss anything, or do you have anything to add?
That is everything. The only thing I would add is that as we're going over these families, the family is the project delivery method. These documents are not divided by commercial versus residential. That's a common question. So these families of documents could be used for any type of project, whether it's commercial or residential or whatever it happens to be, public, private, or anything like that. So what we've gone over so far is the conventional family. This is the most common family, so this is the most frequently used. We also have a small projects family, which is basically exactly like this. We'll go over that in just a minute, but this is how that's set up. And then so there are other setups. And so just again, you can use any of these families for residential or commercial or whatever it happens to be.
All right, thank you, Ben. So as Ben alluded to, it's a nice segue onto our small projects family. So we have a small family for small projects. These are for projects that are small, straightforward, and of short duration is how we kind of define small projects. What small actually means is kind of up to you. It's subjective. But for this purpose, we still have documents between that owner, architect, and contractor, except we've abbreviated these documents even further. So these documents are stripped down to the essentials, basically, and these are called our short form owner architect and owner contractor agreements. And again, these are basically stripped down to the very essentials just to make a shorter, simpler contract, but in exchange, there is more risk involved. So again, if you want to, you can take a look at what's actually in these contracts on our Documents tab, and you can actually get to know these documents and decide what level of complexity you may need for your project in terms of these relationships. So that's all that's defined in the small projects. We don't have any additional roles there because then you start to creep into that design, bid, build, delivery method. So simple as that. Now moving into our construction manager as advisor, or CMA family. So this is when the owner retains a construction manager to act as an advisor on construction management matters. So you're going to start in the same place here. We're going to have the owner. The owner is still going to retain an architect, but also around the same time, the owner is going to retain a CMA, or a construction manager as advisor. Now that CMA is going to give the owner construction management advice through both the design and construction phase as well. So the CMA is also going to have increased expertise in managing a project from start to finish, which makes sense given the nature of the role. So that CMA gets involved early on in the project in that design phase or that pre-construction phase. And the owner now is still going to retain the contractors directly. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at what contracts define these relationships. So for the CMA family, you're going to have the B132 to define your owner architect agreement. And then we have that owner CMA agreement, which is the C132. And then similarly, it's going to have its own document for that owner contractor relationship, which is your A132. So if you remember in a conventional delivery method, I also should note that the CMA has its own set of general conditions, used the A232 document. So if you remember when we covered the conventional delivery method, that first relationship diagram we covered, we had some of the same parties here. So for example, that owner architect agreement, which is now the B132 that you see on your screen, before that was, for example, the B101. So here you have a completely different document, that B132, between the owner and the architect. And that document is different to account for the differences in responsibilities and how this project is going to be handled as a project that has a CMA, or a construction manager as advisor. So that's just why delivery method of your project matters and why we group our documents into families, because our documents are interrelated because, of course, the relationships in a construction contract or construction project are interrelated. So even when you're choosing a document that just involves two parties, you still have to take the bigger picture in mind in terms of how the project is being delivered and who's involved. So we have our CMA prime agreements here. You have your general conditions. similar setup. We also are going to have those sub-agreements as well. So for example, your contractors are going to hire subcontractors. That still uses that A41, that simple contractor-subcontractor agreement. And similarly, you're also going to have those consultant agreements. And those are the same ones we talked about earlier. Those work in this family as well, that C401 architecture consultant agreement and the C103 owner direct consultants agreement. So the next family we're going to move into has a similar title here, but of course is set up differently. And that's going to be your construction manager as constructor, or CMC. So this is where the owner retains a construction manager, and that manager provides pre-construction and construction management services. Now what that means is we're going to hop to the diagram here. You have your owner. Again, your owner still retains that architect. And now instead of hiring a CMA or a contractor, the architect is going to retain a CMC. Now, a CMC is going to advise during pre-construction and then build the work. So a CMC is different from a CMA because they're actually providing those services beyond just advising, and they're going to build the work. A CMC is different from a contractor because their involvement begins earlier in the project. So they're advising in that pre-construction phase rather than joining into the project after it's been bid out. So this is similar to the design, bid, build, delivery method. So it's still going to use that A201 general conditions document. You can still use that in conjunction with these agreements. You just have to make modifications to the cost of work. And of course, you're going to have some altered agreements here to accommodate this family. So between the architect and the owner, you're going to have that B133, which is just your owner-architect agreement for the CMC family, again, to accommodate those differences in delivery method. And then you're going to have, whether you want the GMP or without GMP, again, that means guaranteed maximum price. You're going to have that A133 or A134. So you have those documents there. From there, you're going to have your sub-agreements. You're still using that C104 over with your architect and consultants. With your owner, you're still going to have that C103 that applies there. And then when your CMC is hiring subcontractors, you're going to notice that it still uses the A401 contractor-subcontractor agreement. So by the time that you get to this point in the project, so you're going to be in the construction phase by the time you're ready to hire on those subs. So by the time we get to the construction phase, your CMC is essentially going to be working as the contractor. So that's why that A401 contractor-subcontractor agreement still stands. So that's a layout of the CMC. Ben, is there anything to add for CMA or CMC before we move into design build here? Excuse me.
I think you covered all the main points. Just a couple of quick things. Sometimes colloquially, CMA is called CM agent or CM not at risk, whereas CMC is sometimes called CMGC because the CM is acting as a general contractor, or CM at risk. So in this case, risk refers to construction. So CMC would be CM at risk because the CM is actually doing the construction. CMA is CM advisor, so that's sometimes called CM not at risk because they're not doing the construction. So just colloquially, those terms are used. Also, that brings to mind, and since I mentioned CMGC, we don't use the term general contractor. We just use the term contractor or subcontractor, or in this case, construction manager contractor, construction manager advisor. So sometimes we may use a term or may not use a term, and it might just be something that's more of a colloquial in nature.
Right, thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
So the last family that we're going to go into detail here about, we'll mention some of the other ones, but the last diagram we have to show you is the design build family. And that just is when the owner enters into a single contract with the design builder, And then the design builder is the one who's then obligated to design and construct the project. So we're going to see how that looks a little different. So starting with your owner, as always, instead of hiring an architect and a contractor or a construction manager, they're going to hire a design builder who then is the one who is responsible for bringing on that architect and contractor or contractors. So you have that A141, that owner design builder agreement. And then you're going to have adjusted agreements for between the architect and contractor and the design builder. So that's your B143. Here's your design builder and architect agreement, and your A142, which is your design builder and contractor agreement. And then you're also going to have sub-agreements for those as well. Now, all of the sub-agreements, whereas we saw some consistency earlier for design build, they're all going to be a little altered here just to accommodate the design build family. Design build brings on a whole world of nuances depending on the complexity of the project or different factors involved. We don't have time today to get into all of the nuances of design build, but I will show you exactly where you can go to read more if you are using design build delivery for your projects. And there's also, for the contractor and subcontractors, that separate agreement as well. So again, that kind of wraps up the families that we'll be going over the relationship diagrams of. We just want to spend some time just going over the different contract administration and project management forms. Again, those are your G-Series documents, and they're also their own separate family. So these are going to include your payment applications and certificates, your change orders, your qualification statements, your construction change directives or CCDs, your requests for information or RFIs, and your bonds. Now, Ben's going to take it away here and just go over some of the common forms and examples of each of these categories here.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to, again, briefly go over these things. We do have different forms, different variations. These ones that are listed here, like, for example, G701, these are the conventional forms, the conventional versions of these forms. So G701 is a change order, and then we have other versions. We have, for example, a version for a subcontractor. We have a version for design build, but G701 is the sort of conventional change order. By the same token, we have G702 and G703. Those are the payment request forms. So a contractor would use those to request payment, and the contractor is going to break down their detail on the G703, and that's just a table, and then submit the request on G702, and then the architect is going to certify that payment, and then the owner pays the contractor. That's how that is set up. Oh, and by the way, just to go back to what a change order is, it's just any type of change. So many people think of a change order as being dollars and cents, and it usually is, but it can be literally any type of change to an owner-contractor agreement. As long as all the parties agree, then they can use that G701 change order or whatever the appropriate change order is to affect that change, and everybody signs it. So in a conventional project, that would be the owner, the architect, and the contractor signing it to say we are doing this change, again, whatever it is, and that's what a change order is. So G702 and 703, those are the pay application forms. G704 is a certificate of substantial completion. We briefly went over what that is. So again, just to certify that the job is substantially complete. So it sets that date that the job is substantially complete as of the date of the certificate. And it also mentions that there's going to be an inspection list or punch list of items to be completed or corrected that's supposed to be attached to that. And then we have G706 and also G706A. These are affidavits. G706A is an affidavit of release of liens. So it's important to note here that this is not actually a lien release in and of itself. It is an affidavit. So you still need to attach the lien release to this document. The reason we don't publish a lien release in and of itself is because requirements vary by state for the release or waiver of liens. So the idea is you would take that AIA document, G706A, that's your affidavit, and you would attach the lien release to that document. And then G709 is just a proposal request, and that's just to request some sort of proposal from a party. So it's pretty broad, pretty open-ended there. And we did update that in, I think it was 2018, so relatively recently. Well, one other thing about these forms, they're not always updated that frequently. As Sarah mentioned, it's usually a 10-year cycle for most of our agreements, but for our forms, they can sometimes go much longer. So for example, G702 and G703 haven't been updated since 1992, and we don't anticipate a need to update them anytime soon. They are relatively simple forms, so some of these may be much longer than 10 years. Okay, continuing with more common forms, we have a CCD, a construction change directive. That is just simply a directive for changes in the work where the parties have not agreed on the details. So a change order is a change to which all the parties have agreed, but there could be a situation where a change needs to be made relatively quickly, but the parties haven't agreed on all the terms of that change yet. So it's a directive to the contractor to just perform the work, affect the change, and then we'll iron out the details later. That's essentially what that is. G716 is an RFI, request for information. Again, pretty broad, pretty simple. It's just for one party requesting information from another party. So it's a way to keep track of that. It's just an instrument to say, okay, this party is requesting this piece of information, and to have it organized in that way. So that way you know when and where and what was being requested. Then we have our qualification statements, A305 and B305. A is for a contractor, B is for an architect, and this is just simply like a resume of sorts, and it's just basically a bunch of questions that the party fills out. A305 for a contractor, B305 for an architect. So it's basically stating their qualifications, and so just putting information about themselves, their firm, and so an owner could review those qualification statements in deciding which to pick. And then we have our bond forms, A310 and A312. These were actually updated fairly recently. By recently, I mean 2010, so I guess it's been about a decade, but they are the bid bond form. A310 is a bid bond. A312 is actually two bonds, the performance bond and a payment bond. So A310 is a bond used in bidding to secure the bid, to make sure that the bids are being submitted responsibly and not just unnecessarily or unnaturally low. And then A312 is to cover the contractor's performance, and then also the contractor's obligations to pay their subcontractors.
All right, thank you, Ben. I know that was a lot to go over, but hopefully that covers most of the forms that you will be seeing out there as you go to work with any related forms. So we're running a little short on time here, and I want to be able to get to some Q&A here at the end. So I'm going to go through these other families fairly briefly. I'm just going to mention the families that we haven't gone over today and show you where you can find more information about them if you think they apply to you. So we have Integrated Project Delivery, or IPD. This is just a collaborative project delivery approach that's centered around sharing risk amongst parties. We have interiors for furniture, furnishings, and equipment, procurement for those, mostly for tenant projects. International for U.S. architects working abroad. We have digital practice documents for projects that involve any digital data information sharing or building information modeling, or BIM. And then we also have program management documents, in which the owner involves additional consultants to assist with program-wide design. So if any of these families seem like they apply to any projects that you have or may have in the future, a good place to go to find more information on those. So I'm going to hop back to the Contract Documents website here. For example, you can just go to the help section and, for example, type in interiors family. And you're going to get a whole list of FAQs. You're going to get the different documents that are involved in the family. And if I scroll down here, you're also going to find a list of all contract document relationship diagrams that we went over today. So for example, interiors is also going to have its own relationship diagram. And we can send around this link in the follow-up email. We'll also be sending around the slides and recording of today's presentation, but we'll also send you a link to these contract relationship diagrams so that you can review those on your own time as well and get into a little more detail. So we have one more concept to go over before we go into Q&A. Ben's briefly going to go over master agreements, what they are and what's available.
Okay, thank you. So master agreements are very similar to the conventional family, but they are different than any of the other families we've discussed because all of the families we've discussed prior were for a single project. So a project with a beginning, middle, and end. And so the parties get together, however they arrange it, conventional, design build, CMA, CMC, the parties get together, they have their agreements, they have their general conditions, they design the project, and the project gets built, and then it's done. A master agreement is for an ongoing situation. So this is for a period of 1 year, and then it's for multiple jobs, multiple things, and then the work or services to be performed are then performed under multiple work orders or service orders. So that applies to all 4 of the things that you see here. So we have owner contractor, contractor subcontractor, owner architect, architect consultant. They're all set up the same way. You have a master agreement like A121, like A421, all those at the first ones listed there. Those are all master agreements. So that means that the parties involved are going to enter into this master agreement and then do work under the associated work order, or in the case of architectural services, we call it a service order. So for example, A121, the owner and contractor get together, they have their master agreement under that agreement, A121, and then do A221 for a work order, and then another A221 for another work order, and another, however many that needs to be.
All right, thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
So let's go ahead and move into some questions here from the audience. So Ben, I'm going to ask you some of the questions that have come in. The first one I'm seeing here is, what are the insurance requirements for CMA versus CMC?
That is a very good question, and I am neither an attorney nor an insurance professional, so I don't really have a great answer for that, but there are very detailed differences between these families, and so I would assume that there are different insurance requirements for CMA versus CMC, because that goes back to what I was saying about CM at risk versus CM not at risk. So the duties and rights and responsibilities of a CMA versus a CMC are quite different. CM advisor is providing advice, but they're not actually swinging a hammer. CMC is providing advice, oversight, pre-construction services, but also doing constructions. They are swinging the hammer, so to speak. So I would assume that there are different insurance requirements. Unfortunately, I cannot speak to the details there on that. We might be able to answer that with more detail if we want to follow up after this, but unfortunately, I can't really get into those details. I'm sorry about that.
All right, so the next question I see here is, if an architect is contracted under a B101, but during the project, the owner modifies the project to include a CMC, does the owner need to amend the agreement to the architect to use the B133?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So what we've talked about so far are the different families, and we're not necessarily saying that this is going to cover all subjects, all project delivery methods. It probably will cover a lot of them, maybe a majority of them, but there may be some situations that are different, that maybe don't fit into one of the families, or there may be a situation like the one you described where maybe things change midstream. So if I'm understanding it correctly, so the parties start with B101, but then the owner says, okay, I want to do CM. There are a couple things you could do. You could replace B101 with B133. Quite frankly, that might be a lot of work. But another option would be just to amend B101 as it exists. If you've already signed it, then it's probably going to be a lot of work to go back and modify it. But it's going to be even more work to go and to start over with a completely new agreement like B133. So if you know ahead of time, ideally you would know ahead of time, you could enter into B133, but obviously it's not a perfect world. So you could use G802, which is an amendment form, to modify B101 and then go forward with the project as a CMC project. That would probably be simpler than just starting over with the B133.
Thank you, Ben. Next question I see here is, can the design builder be an architecture firm, particularly in New York State?
So a design builder can be anybody. So a design builder could be an architect, design builder could be a contractor, or some other party, an engineer or something else like that. However, we can't speak to any state laws, and there are different state requirements, particularly as it relates to design build. The laws around design build they vary, and sometimes greatly, from state to state. So I don't know what the laws are in New York State, so I can't answer that. I don't know if a design builder can be an architecture firm in New York State. I don't know the answer to that or not. But for the purposes of our documents, a design builder is just a single entity. So in general, it could be an architecture firm, it could be a construction firm, it could be an engineering firm, it could be anybody. Again, I'm not speaking to New York State or any state specifically, but when we use the term design builder, we mean an entity, a single entity, which is just simply responsible for the design portion and the build portion. And then they, the design builder, can then hire whoever they need to hire, an architect or a contractor below them. So that's the setup. Again, without speaking to any particular state, that's the design build setup.
Okay, are there any AIA contracts that cover use of photos or drawings for marketing use, for example?
Photos or drawings for marketing use. We do have the digital family, and I believe you, Sarah, you did mention that for BIM, building information modeling, and also for exchange of digital information. I think that C106 and maybe some of the, specifically C106, and maybe some of the other documents in that family might be appropriate for that. The reason I mentioned C106 specifically is because that is a digital data licensing agreement. So it is to license digital data that is exchanged between two parties. So I think that would be appropriate because it is very broad, and that's what it is. That's what it's intended for. So I think that might be a good document to use. Does it specifically talk about marketing purposes or photos or drawings? No, but I think it's broad enough to incorporate that.
All right, thank you, Ben. It looks like we're coming right up against our time. If there are any additional questions, or if you didn't get a chance to fit your question in today, a good place for you to go here is going to be, I'm going to display this. We have the Learn page, which I went over, that has our different trainings and resources. That's on our AIAcontractdocuments.org homepage /learn. You'll also have the help section for more document-specific information. And you also have two different support teams that you can give a call based on what questions you have. Any questions you have on using the online service, you can get in touch with our tech team there. Any questions you have about document content, we have a document info line that you can call or email. Chances are you are going to get the very own Ben Siegel himself.